In the year of 1534, under a twilight sky heavy with incense and whispers, the court of Emperor Alaric IV held a silence that even time dared not disturb. The palace, built not from stone, but from the petrified bones of 1,000 ancestors, loomed over the northern hills of Valtheria like a sleeping serpent. Beneath its vaulted ceilings, velvet drapes bled red, and candelabras flickered not with wax, but with the slow-burning oils extracted from sacred funerary rites. It was here that a young girl named Lysara was summoned, her name etched in gold on a letter she was forbidden to read aloud. She was 16, of noble blood, but not noble enough to deny the emperor's will. When the decree arrived at her family estate, her father wept not with sorrow, but with relief. To be chosen as a bride for the monarch was an honor beyond contest, an elevation, a salvation. But her mother did not speak for 3 days. On the 4th day, she pressed a blade of obsidian into Lysara's palm and whispered, "If he asks for your name twice, do not answer. Whatever he says, never sleep before he does." No one explained why. The procession that led her to the palace was silent, blindfolded, and bound, not as prisoners, but as offerings. The emperor did not tolerate gaze upon his sacred grounds until he himself allowed it. When Lysara finally stepped into the Hall of Ember Kings, the air tasted of metal and rot. She was not greeted by servants, but by 12 women dressed identically in mourning robes. None spoke. They only bathed her in a basin of water black as midnight, then stitched her into a wedding gown made of funeral veils. Emperor Alaric did not attend the ceremony. Instead, a blood oath was read aloud by the High Oracle, who looked no older than 12, and spoke with a voice too deep for her age. At midnight, Lysara was led to the chamber of binding, where she would meet her husband for the first time. She expected grandeur. Instead, she found a room barren of furniture, with only a bed of thorns in its center. The only light came from a single candle, bent sideways, as if recoiling from what it had witnessed. And then he arrived. Alaric, foremonarch of the Ebon Throne, was said to be blessed by the undying flame. No portraits of him were ever painted. His face, they said, changed depending on who looked. To Lysara, he appeared young, impossibly young, no older than herself. Yet his eyes held centuries' eyes that had seen plague, war, and the collapse of gods. He did not speak at first. He only circled her, barefoot on the cold marble floor, dragging behind him a trail of crimson silk that shimmered like fresh blood. Then he asked, "What is your name, my queen?" "Lysara," she answered, barely above a whisper. He stopped walking. "What is your name?" he asked again. She remembered her mother's words. Her heart thundered, said nothing. The candle flickered. He smiled. That night, they did not lie together. He only watched her as she slept, or rather pretended to sleep, her eyes closed but mind racing. At some point, she drifted into a shallow dream, and in it, she heard him whispering to something behind the walls. When she woke, there was blood on the pillow. Not hers. A small lock of black hair rested beside it. By morning, she was given her duties. A queen's role, she was told, was not to rule, but to remember, to witness, to survive. And that was the beginning of the first day. But none of the previous queens had survived the second. Lysara's second dawn, as empress, began not with sunlight, but with the tolling of the morning bell, 3 low notes that vibrated through the palace walls like the breath of something ancient and long buried. When she rose, she found her chamber changed. The thorns from the bed were gone, replaced by pale white lilies. The bloodstain had vanished, but the lock of black hair remained, now braided and pinned carefully onto her pillow as though part of some macabre ritual. Waiting outside her chamber were 2 of the mourning-robed women. They neither greeted her nor offered explanation. Instead, they led her wordlessly through a corridor that had not existed the night before. The walls wept moisture. The floor creaked, though no weight pressed upon it. At the end of this passage was a door carved from bone scrimshawed, with the faces of women screaming, their eyes hollowed out by time or cruelty. Inside, she met the archivist. A man so old that his skin resembled cracked parchment, the archivist had no tongue. Only a series of iron tubes running from his throat to a wooden box that amplified his rasping voice like the whisper of a dying wind. He sat amidst shelves upon shelves of books bound in leather, far too supple to be cowhide. He motioned for Lysara to sit. When she did, he pushed forward a tome. On its cover, her name had already been etched in dried blood. "Every queen has a volume," the voice box rasped. "Most are quite short." Lysara opened it. The pages were blank save for the first line, which read, "Day 1. She answered only once. "The pact remains unbroken." She trembled. "What happened to the others?" she asked, her voice barely more than breath. The archivist turned to a nearby shelf and with cracked fingers plucked a thin volume. The name upon it read, "Celine of Riverthrun." He opened it. Only 3 lines. "Day 1, she wept. Day 2, she screamed. Day 3, she was taken. Taken where? By whom?" No answers came. For the remainder of the day, Lysara was led through a maze of rituals. She was made to sit for hours facing a black mirror that showed her reflection only when she blinked. She was forced to drink from a silver chalice that burned her lips, but left no marks. She was red. Poems written by voices hidden behind veils, poems about love so consuming it devoured memory, and of kings who fed their hearts to the moon. That evening she was dressed in silks the color of bruises and led to the Hall of 7 Vows. There Alaric waited. He sat upon a throne carved not from wood or gold, but from a tangle of human spines. At his feet knelt 3 figures: a boy with no eyes, a woman with no tongue, and a man with no skin. Each trembled in rhythm with the flickering torches. Alaric spoke without looking at her. "Tell me, Lysara, would you die for love?" She did not answer. "Would you live for it?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost sad. Still, silence. He stood then and stepped toward her. The air thickened. Around him, the shadows did not follow his shape, they led it. "You are the first in 70 years to reach the second night," he whispered. "And I wonder if that is by your strength or by the exhaustion of the curse." "What curse?" she finally asked. He took her hand and placed it over his heart. She felt no beat, no warmth. "I wed because I must," he said. "To hold the veil between worlds closed, the blood of love must be renewed with each moon's passing. But love dies quickly when it is bought in fear." Lysara's fingers trembled. "So you kill them?" "No," he said. "I mourn them." Then he gestured toward the 3 kneeling figures. They were once kings of other realms, husbands of other cursed brides. They failed to remember. You must not. With that, he turned away and vanished into smoke. That night, as she lay in her chamber now filled with the scent of burning myrrh, she opened her volume again. A second line had appeared. Day 2, she asked nothing. She remembered everything. And beneath it, in handwriting not her own, "The veil weakens." The third day dawned without a sky. When Lysara opened her eyes, the world outside her chamber had vanished. No windows, no bird song, only the endless toll of a windless silence. Like the palace had been swallowed by the belly of something vast and sleeping. Her chamber had changed again this time. The floor was covered in hundreds of white petals, all curled inward, as though mourning something unseen. On the ceiling, a single crack had appeared, from which a dark red thread slowly descended, twisting in the still air. She did not speak of it, not yet. Instead, she found herself drawn once more to the Hall of Whispers, so called because it was never marked on any map, and only those the palace chose could find it. Today it found her. The same 2 mourning women, always silent, always watching, led her through corridors she could not retrace if her life depended on it. The hall itself was cold, too cold. Its walls were mirrors, but they did not reflect her. Instead, each panel showed a different woman in a wedding gown. One crying, one screaming, one being dragged by her hair into fire. One smiled while holding a knife behind her back. At the center stood Alaric. But he was not alone. Beside him stood a girl, no older than 12, with hair like coal dust and a mouth sewn shut by silver thread. Her eyes were wide, but not frightened, only resigned. "This," said Alaric, "was my first wife." Lysara's breath caught in her throat. "She loved me," he said, almost tenderly, or thought she did. The veil held for a while. Love is a fragile currency when the gods demand blood. He reached into his robe and pulled out a silver blade, curved, ceremonial, ancient. "I have buried 50 brides," he said. "Each time the veil tears, I must marry again. Not for desire, for containment." Containment? Lysara asked, her voice raw. He turned to her then, and for the first time his eyes were not ancient but hollow, as if something inside had already fled long ago. There is something behind the veil, he whispered. Something older than time, older than gods. It speaks in dreams, feeds on love rotted by fear. And every time a queen forgets who she is or breaks the pact, it slips one step closer. The girl beside him nodded slowly, her sewn mouth trembling. Lysara stepped back. "Why me?" said nothing. But the girl, his first queen, turned to her, and from the slit in her chest, small parchment uncurled like a scroll from flesh. It fell to the floor. Lysara picked it up with shaking hands. The one who remembers with no love in her heart will unmake the veil. That night she did not return to her chamber. She wandered the palace, alone, through halls where portraits bled from their frames, past fountains that whispered names she had never spoken aloud. In one corridor she found a child's toy, a wooden doll with its head turned backward and its hands painted red. In another, she found a door carved with her own face. It opened at her touch. Inside, she saw them, the queens, all of them, suspended in glass coffins, eyes closed, some peaceful, some twisted in agony, some missing pieces. One wept still, though clearly dead. And on the wall, etched in fire, a line of scripture she could not look away from. Only the unloved can love purely. Only the unloved can hold the veil. It made no sense, and yet it explained everything. When she returned to her chamber, her book awaited her. Day 3, she saw. She chose silence. The thread has begun to unravel. There was more. One night remains. The fourth night came without warning. No bell, no procession. Only the sound of her name, Lysara, whispered by voices that came from no mouths, seeping through the cracks of the palace like smoke from a distant fire. It echoed not once but twice, and with the second utterance the air itself seemed to recoil. She remembered her mother's warning. Her room had vanished entirely. She now stood in a vast, endless hall. The marble beneath her feet shimmered like oil on water, and above her there was no ceiling, only a sky stitched together by strands of bleeding thread. In the distance, a figure waited. Alaric, but he was no longer a man. He wore no crown, no silk, no skin. His body was flame-wrapped in shadow, his face a shifting mask of every king who had ever broken a vow. Around him, the air wept, and the stone floor cracked under the pressure of his presence. "I am no longer emperor," he said, his voice both within her skull and outside time itself. "I am what remains when 1,000 loves die screaming." Lysara did not run. She stepped forward. "Then why choose me?" she asked. Alaric's form trembled. "Because you do not love. Not me, not the crown, not yourself." She said nothing. He moved toward her, and with each step, the hall darkened, as if the veil itself shivered in anticipation. "There must be one to hold the veil," he whispered. "Not with devotion, not with desire, but with emptiness. The world's love has failed, so now it must be preserved by its opposite." He reached into his chest, and from within pulled a beating heart. It did not bleed. It burned. "This was once mine," he said. "Now it must be yours." Lysara looked down at her hands. They were no longer her own. Pale, cold, and etched with runes that pulsed with silent agony. The book, the one with her name, peered again at her feet. Its pages fluttered open without wind. There was one final entry. Day 4. She stood at the edge. The veil offered her 2 crowns, one of ash, one of bone. She chose neither. Alaric raised the heart toward her. "You must take it, or all of this returns." The veil falls. The old hunger wakes, and love, what remains of it, becomes flesh once more. And then she understood. Not just the curse, the cycle. Each bride chosen for her hope, her innocence, her desire to love and be loved. But each became corrupted, consumed, broken. Because love in this place was fuel for the darkness. But Lysara had never loved. Not her family, who bartered her away like grain. Not her kingdom, which watched in silence. Not even herself, whose image she had learned to resent in the mirror. her heart was hollow. And for that, she was perfect. She took the burning heart in both hands, and she crushed it. There was no scream, no fire, only stillness. The veil froze mid-tremble. The skies above sealed with silent stitches, and Alaric fell to his knees. "Why?" he rasped, a shadow of himself. She stepped closer, leaned in, and whispered, "Because I remembered." The palace began to dissolve. Not in ruin, but in shedding, like a chrysalis sloughing off centuries of sorrow. The queens in glass coffins opened their eyes one final time and closed them in peace. The mourning women smiled. The mirrors cracked, and Lysara, she was no longer there. The world woke the next morning as if from a fever dream. The name Lysara was no longer spoken. The palace of bones forgotten, the throne empty. But somewhere far beyond time and map, there stood a door. And behind it, a woman with no heart, but with all the memories of love that had ever failed. She would keep the veil now, not out of duty, not out of fear, but because she was the last who could, and the first who dared.